Hello and welcome to India Tonight. As the world slowly but steadily emerges out of recession, how is the British economy faring? That's one of the key issues I shall discuss today with Britain's first Secretary of State, the Business Secretary, Peter Mandelson. Lord Mandelson, let's start with the state of the British economy. The well-known Financial Times columnist Martin Wolf says the UK is poorer than it thought it was. Do you agree with him?
Well, the UK, like everywhere else, has taken quite a beating. I mean, there is no part of the developed world, and to an extent the emerging economies as well, but particularly in the developed world where financial services are so strong, as they are in Britain, that has failed to take a beating. And it's been a rough year. But I think it's very striking that at the beginning of this crisis, many people, ourselves included in the government, were predicting a much worse and deeper recession than occurred. If you compare what we've been through in the last year compared to recessions in the 1990s and again in the 1980s, unemployment has not gone as high as it did previously in those recessions. The rate of business failures, insolvencies, has not been as great as previously. Housing repossessions has been operating at a lower rate in the last year than before. So it's been tough. But the government fought back very strongly.
No one would question that, in fact, the recession hasn't been as severe as it could have been and was predicted or expected to be. But, in fact, the paradox is that the British economy is suffering a collapse in forecast revenue much greater than any of its competitor developed economies. Martin Wolf points out that between the budget of 2008 and the pre-budget 2009 report, the forecast of revenue has collapsed by an astonishing 18.1%.
Well, there's one reason for that, and that is that we were very dependent and arguably over-dependent for our revenues from our financial services sector.
The point I was coming to, in fact. Not only are you...
But it and the revenues are coming round, I'm pleased.
But are they? Because he points out once again that if you look at the 12 months up to October 2008 and compare it to the 12 months up to October 2009, corporate taxation has fallen by over 25%.
Yes, and it's left our public finances rather exposed. We've covered that by increased borrowing, by taking on debt, which we've necessarily had to do, because we determined right from the beginning that we would not only save our banks, which we've done, we've not lost one, but that secondly, we would fight back against this recession in a way that previous governments have failed to do. And the result is that we're now coming out of recession. I noticed today, for example, that the performance and growth figures for the third quarter have been revised upwards from their original provisional announcement, and therefore I am very confident indeed that the figures in the fourth quarter for this year will show that quite clearly we're out of recession.
I'll come to both those points in a moment's time, the extent and speed with which and the confidence with which you're pulling out of recession, and as well as the manner in which you've covered up for the collapse in finances. But for a moment, let's just concentrate on the extent of the collapse in finances. Martin Wolf points out, and I'm quoting him, the fiscal deterioration in the UK has been far bigger than in any other member of the group of 7 leading high-income countries. And as you said, the reason is the UK economy's incredible dependence on the financial sector. Does that dependence today worry you?
No, it doesn't worry me, but it does offer a lesson. And the lesson that I take from it is that whilst financial services have been an excellent performer in the UK during the last 10 years, they've been one of the main GDP growth drivers for Britain during the last 10 years, they will not be so to the same extent in the coming decade. And therefore my stress has been on looking to ways in which we can diversify our strengths and different growth sectors and markets within the UK economy, and that's what we're going to do. Not that we're abandoning financial services. Well, on the contrary, I mean, we in New York, London and New York, will remain the twin global financial hubs for the world economy. And the City of London already is way back on its feet and striding forward. But I recognise that whilst it will be as strong in the future as it has been in the past, it will not grow to the same extent. And therefore we are going to look to other, more diverse sources of growth for for the UK economy in the future.
So if I understand you correctly, you're deliberately pursuing a policy of diversification of government resource creation so that your dependence for revenue on the financial sector and the City of London in particular is minimized as other areas grow up in comparison.
My own particular brand of industrial activism, as I call it, is focusing on different technology-driven sectors and markets in the economy. For example, our transition to low-carbon economy and society is more advanced in Britain than it is in other countries in Europe. Now, that's important. It will not only help in the fight against climate change, which we attach huge importance to, but it means that we are going to be able to supply that transition from the UK better than other countries are going to be able to, and in doing so, we're going to supply other low-carbon transitions in other economies. And incidentally, we want to do that in greater collaboration with India and Indian businesses and companies.
Absolutely.
As I've been stressing during my visit.
Let's come now to the second issue that you raised, which I postponed discussing and I want to take up now, the manner in which you are pulling yourselves out of what Martin Wolf calls a collapse in forecast of revenue. You've done it, as you admitted a moment ago, by taking on huge debt. The problem is that not just the credit agencies today, but even the Bank of England are now beginning to suggest that the UK could be in danger of losing its AAA rating. Does that worry you?
But we haven't lost it.
No, but you could be, and that's the danger.
Well, of course, anyone could be. Look, they've issued the same warnings about the United States.
They issued them about Greece, and Greece did lose it.
Greece, I'm sorry to say for the Greeks, is in a rather different place from both the United Kingdom and the United States. But look, I'm not saying to you that this doesn't matter. Of course it matters, but we have now, in my view, successfully, confidently demonstrated to the markets that we are going to rebalance our public finances over the medium term. We're going to halve our deficit over the next 4 years, and we are putting in place measures to do so.
Absolutely, but at the same time, the Bank of England itself has pointed out that the cost of insurance against a UK debt default has gone up much more rapidly than in the case of any of the other leading Western economies. Once again, in comparison to your best competitors, you seem to be more precariously positioned.
No, I don't accept that.
Well, Bank of England seems to accept it.
Well, the Bank of England issue many statements.
So you're discounting this one?
I don't attach as equal importance to every single statement that issues from the Bank of England week after week. No, I don't.
Is that confidence or bravado?
It's confidence in the sense that I look to the IMF, to the World Bank, to the European Commission, who are also providing information and statistics, and they're not bearing out that pessimism. But look, it's right for the Bank of England to counsel and to give advice and to warn. We take it, of course, very seriously indeed.
But you just a moment ago seemed to discount it rather than take it seriously.
But it would be more worrying if we weren't taking the measures to address it. If we were both receiving the warnings and then doing nothing about it, then I certainly would be worried.
So is your position that the Bank of England's warning is correctly given, but we're taking the measures to correct the situation, which is why this may be a prediction, but it's not going to turn out to be the reality?
I don't believe we are going to be losing our credit rating in the way that some have been warning, not only about Britain, I stress, but about the United States and other continental European countries.
Let's then come to the third issue that you touched upon, the extent to which Britain is actually pulling out of recession. You mentioned that, in fact, the third quarter figures had been revised upwards. How confident are you that, given the figures you're seeing and the revision upwards, that the economy has actually turned a corner and that the worst is behind you?
Well, confidence is rising, investment is picking up, demand is strong. Retailers are actually predicting the strongest consumer performance this Christmas than we've seen for very many years. Now, the reason for this is that whilst...
But the present Arctic cold wave conditions are going to hit them very badly just in that critical run-up to the Christmas period.
Retailers providing warm clothing are opening the champagne bottles. They're so ecstatic.
But they're a small fragment of the full market.
So I wouldn't worry too much. But let me just make this point to you, if I may. You know, foreign direct investment continues to come into the UK. During 2008 to 2009, foreign direct investment actually rose by 11%. I think that's a pretty important demonstration of confidence in the UK economy. Even our slightly battered financial service sector has increased its net exports by 28% in the last year. Now, I could go on, but what all these statistics and these figures demonstrate is that the fundamentals of the UK are strong and are intact, which has enabled us to weather this storm better than we did similar storms both in the 1990s and the 1980s.
Well, you talk about the fundamentals of the UK economy, but the CBI and more importantly investment banks like JP Morgan are questioning the extent to which manufacturing in UK is actually reviving. The CBI seems to be gloomy about its forecast, and JP Morgan points out that UK manufacturing today is lagging behind international competitors. Just to throw some of the figures they put out at you, the US, it claims, is up 2.9 to 3.9% from June. Germany up 10.3% from April. Japan an astonishing 23% from February. But the UK has only edged up 1.4% since August. Are you worried that your manufacturing sector is not showing the strong growth that you'd like?
But Karen, both the US and the Japanese economies are in a worse position and worse state than we are in Britain. So yes, I'm pleased that their manufacturing output is picking up. But they have other wider problems, certainly worse than our own.
Do you have similar wider problems?
Well,
more than just the recession?
We remain the sixth biggest manufacturing nation in the world. I mean, that might surprise those who think that we don't make anything anymore.
All right, so you're
very welcome.
You're therefore saying to me and through this interview program to any skeptics that the concern with British manufacturing is a concern related to the recession. As the recession ends, manufacturing will grow. It's got nothing to do with deeper fears about the very base.
I'm saying two things to you. First of all, the recession hasn't knocked us as much as we thought, and that secondly, I want to place even more emphasis and invest even further and bring government support to that investment in our manufacturing base. We produce a lot of very good things. I want to see Britain producing even more, even better things, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Let's turn to a specific aspect of British manufacturing. I'm now going to quote to you figures put out by your own High Commission in Delhi just the day before you arrived. Apparently, India has overtaken Japan and become the biggest Asian investor in the UK in terms of the number of projects.
Yes,
absolutely. The Tata Group is probably the biggest of the Indian companies there. Today, the Tata Group employs 47,000 people in Britain, and it has 19 different businesses. Do you therefore today see the Tatas as an Indian company, a foreign company, or are they, in your eyes, British?
I view them as much British as you do view them as Indian. I mean, look, they're one of the biggest employers, absolute cornerstone of our manufacturing base, which is why, for example, in respect of the car industry, and Jaguar Land Rover in particular, I've always made clear that the British government will stand by and very firmly at the side of Jaguar Land Rover, and were the circumstances ever to arise, where financially we had to help that company through the recession, I made it quite clear that we would be prepared to do so. In the event, I'm very glad to say that such is the strength of the company, they were able to get resource from the private sector rather than from the government. But that's a testimony to their strength.
But they did approach you for a guarantee when they were looking for a £340 million
yes, if they couldn't get it from the private sector.
But was there a problem in giving the guarantee? The newspaper reports in India suggested that the British government was hesitant to do so unless the Tatas in turn accepted a government nominee on their board, which they didn't want to do. So was there a sort of impasse or standoff?
Not at all. Of course, when private companies come to us for help, we have to satisfy ourselves. We're representing the taxpayer, as well as holding ourselves answerable to the National Audit Office and Parliament, and not to be dismissed or taken lightly. We have to satisfy ourselves that we know what we're giving loans to, what security for our guarantees will exist, and where we are bridging a company to. So of course you ask questions. Any responsible government would do so.
Was there misunderstanding between the two of you?
No, I don't think so.
But don't think so? Are you confident?
Well, you'll have to ask Tata.
Well, the newspaper reports in India suggested that in fact the Tatas were a little surprised at the response they got. They had thought that the British government would be more willing to give the guarantee.
Would you say that your newspaper reports in India are any more reliable than ours in Britain?
Yours seem to suggest the same thing too. So if both newspapers in both countries come up with the same answer, could they both be wrong?
No, probably because they're copying each other. Look, I'm not going to base my judgments, and certainly not my relationships with important companies like Tata, on the basis of tittle-tattle in newspapers.
Well, you call it tittle-tattle. I'd like to know what Ratan Tata called it, but let's leave that for another occasion. Recently, the Tatas, who also are the owners of Chorus Street, have just laid off 1,700 people, and this is on top of the 4,500 they had to lay off earlier this year. And if you look at the total retrenchment in 2009, it amounts to pretty close to 8% of their 80,000 workforce. Are you understanding of these cuts, or are you critical of them?
Look, steel demand has plummeted globally, and therefore, with our own such strong steel sector, we're bound to be affected by that. But there are two things going on. I mean, one is Chorus Steel, responding to the global recession and the fall in demand for steel, but secondly, taking the opportunity to carry out restructuring, which they want to do, need to do for their future strength. So you have to distinguish between these two things. But I'm very disappointed by the mothballing of the plant on Teesside, partly because it's an excellent plant with a first-rate workforce. It also happens to be in that part of the country where my former constituency is. So, of course, I'm personally very sensitive to this decision. I understand why Chorus have come to this decision. It's because one single contract from a consortium of purchasers of their product, and 80% of their product cancelled their contract 6 years earlier than they originally said they would do.
That this could
so
have been
I understand
avoided?
that. Well, no, that couldn't have been avoided. What I would like, though, however, is to see Chorus maintain the sort of physical viability of the plant, so that we can see whether there are alternative uses or owners for that plant. So and I'm asking Chorus, I've done so in Britain, I shall do so again in conversations in India, to remain open to those alternative uses, to see how plant, infrastructure, land, all of which incidentally I have announced a major British government financial backing for, to improve or to change, for them to remain open to possible new uses and owners.
So if I can put that into a nutshell, your position is you're understanding, but you're disappointed at the same time.
I'm very disappointed, and it's very important indeed that Chorus's owners remain very firmly in touch with and work very closely with the British government, because together we have a joint responsibility for looking to the needs of the workforce and the local community.
Does your disappointment also go on to be criticism of Tatas and the handling of Chorus?
No, I do not.
You stop at disappointment?
I stop at extreme disappointment, but certainly the judgment that I apply will be tied to the cooperation between us going forwards in finding alternative work and uses and possible ownership for that plant on Teesside.
So there's a sense in which you're also saying to the Tatas that I'm going to judge you by how you behave hereafter.
Of course, we do that with every employer.
Is that a warning?
It's not a warning, it's an invitation.
Sounds a bit like a warning.
No, it's an invitation.
Let's take a break at that point. Lord Mandelson, I want to come back and in the brief time left to us talk about British politics and ask you the question most Indians who follow your country are probably asking, can Labour win or is it destined to lose? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to India Tonight and an interview with Britain's first Secretary of State and Business Secretary, Peter Mandelson. Lord Mandelson, briefly let's touch upon British politics. Those people in India who pay attention to the subject are firmly convinced that your government is heading towards an electoral defeat in May 2010. How can you convince them that that's not a certainty?
By having better answers and better future policies for our country than the opposition.
Are you saying that they should judge the government's performance and likelihood of success by the interview you've just given?
Partly, yes. Should they be lucky
So
to
if they
see it.
believe what you say,
but
they'll believe the government's going to win, and if they don't, the government will lose.
I think the important point is this, that we have been in office, what, 12, 13 years, and by any reckoning, certainly by British standards, people will be thinking, well, do we want them to continue? Do we want an alternative?
You can see that's the problem.
Is their time up? Well, it's a sort of fact of life, which I don't deny. But equally, people will look at the course of Britain over the last 10 years or so, and I think most people feel that in relation to our economy, our public services, our position in Europe and the world, Britain has strengthened. Broadly speaking, people like the direction that Britain has taken during the last 10 years, but they're not going to vote for us at the next election on the basis simply of what we've done in the past. They will be looking at our future offer, what we bring, our values, our policies, whether we have better answers to Britain's problems than the opposition.
A second impression that people in India have formed over the last 2 years of Britain, and in particular of your government, is that you have a Prime Minister who's A, unlucky, but B, probably unsuccessful. How would you convince Indians that that's an unfair judgment?
He was unlucky enough to be in office when we were hit by the biggest international financial storm we have seen in many generations, but he was successful in his response to it. I mean, he led the way very decisively and very boldly. Others followed suit subsequently in dealing with the banking crisis.
Would your party and your
So I think he has something to show for his time in office.
Would your party and your government be in a better position if Tony Blair was Prime Minister today?
Well, I mean, that is sort of so hypothetical that it's unanswerable, isn't it?
But it is a question people ask.
Well,
and increasingly, sadly, for Gordon Brown.
Well, I'm not sure that the people are asking that question. I think they see that Tony Blair had an excellent innings, a very successful term in office, and they've now seen him move on to other things in the world. They're going to be comparing, when the next election comes, two prime ministerial candidates, one Gordon Brown, who has proven success.
The other David Cameron, who's younger
and very
seems
strong,
to be more popular.
Very strong experience and maturity, and an alternative in David Cameron, who, yes, has a sort of nice, breezy, fresh-faced smile to the camera.
Just what Tony Blair offered in '97 when you were managing his election and you took him to victory.
Much more appealing than the previous Conservative leaders who came before him.
Couldn't you say the same of Cameron in comparison to Labour?
But people will be saying, is this enough? I mean, does he have the depth? I mean, does he have the knowledge, the experience that Britain needs?
Lord Mandelson, let's hope that's the question, not only that they ask, but they answer it the way you want.
Indeed.
Lord Mandelson, a pleasure talking to you.
And indeed for me too.